This is my first and most horrible story. I grew up in a small town just outside of York, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your parents' names, and the worst thing you've ever done by the time you're 12. At the center of it stood St. Bartholomew's Church, a gray stone building that had been there longer than any living person could remember. It wasn't famous, it wasn't beautiful in the grand cathedral sense, but it had presence, especially at night. The church sat slightly elevated on a hill, surrounded by crooked gravestones that leaned like tired teeth. The stained glass windows were dull during the day, but at night, when the streetlights flickered below, they looked like dark, watchful eyes. I hadn't stepped inside St. Bartholomew's in years, not since I was a kid forced to attend Sunday service. But that changed the night my younger sister Emily went missing. She was 16, quiet, kept to herself mostly. The only thing unusual about her recently was that she'd started volunteering at the church after school. She said she liked the silence, said it helped her think. The evening she disappeared, she texted me at 8:42 p.m. "I'm still at the church. Father Thomas asked me to help lock up." That was the last message she ever sent. By 11 p.m., my mother was hysterical. Father Thomas claimed Emily had left hours earlier. He said she finished helping him clean and walked out alone. But something didn't sit right with me, because at 10:15 p.m., as I drove past the church looking for her, I could have sworn I saw a light still on inside. The next night, I went back. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell the police. I just needed to see it for myself. The iron gate creaked as I pushed it open. The graveyard felt colder than the rest of the town. Not dramatically colder, just enough to notice. My breath fogged faintly in the air. The main church doors were locked, but the side entrance, the one near the old storage shed, was slightly ajar. That's when I felt it. The silence. No wind, no insects, no distant cars, just stillness. I stepped inside. The air smelled like old wood and candle wax. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass, casting distorted patches of color across the pews. The altar stood empty at the front, a tall crucifix looming above it. "Emily?" I called softly. My voice echoed too much. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps dull against the stone floor. Everything looked normal. Hymn books neatly stacked, candles extinguished. Then I heard it. A faint wooden creak from the back of the church, near the confession booths. There were 2 old confessionals built into the wall, dark wooden structures with narrow doors and small lattice windows. They hadn't been used regularly in years. Father Thomas preferred modern confessions in his office. Another creak, like someone shifting their weight inside. I swallowed. Hello? Silence. I told myself it was the building settling. Old wood expands and contracts at night. That's all. But as I turned to leave, I heard breathing. Soft, slow, coming from inside the left confessional. I stood frozen. "Emily," I whispered. The breathing stopped. Then, slowly, the small door to the penitent's side of the booth creaked open on its own. Not fast, not dramatic, just slow. I don't know why I stepped closer. Maybe I expected her to jump out and scare me. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid. The inside of the booth was pitch black. "I'm coming in," I said, my voice barely steady. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. The booth was empty, completely empty. No one inside. But the air in the small space felt wrong, heavy, like it had just been occupied. And then my phone screen flickered. Just for a second, the light dimmed. I stepped back out of the booth. That's when I heard it again. Breathing. But this time, it wasn't in front of me. It was behind me. Inside the priest's side of the confessional. The door on that side was closed. Very slowly, 3 knocks came from inside. My entire body went cold. There shouldn't have been anyone in there. The priest's side connects to a small private entrance. I would have seen someone go in. I stared at the door. "Father Thomas?" I forced out. No response. Just silence. And then, a whisper. So faint, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. "Forgive me." The voice wasn't male. It wasn't old. It sounded like Emily. I rushed to the priest's door and yanked it open. The booth was empty. But carved into the wooden wall beside the seat were words I knew hadn't been there before. They were fresh, the wood splintered and pale. I leaned closer and read, "He doesn't let us leave." My heart began to pound so hard I thought I'd pass out. Us. I left the church that night, shaking. The police dismissed what I told them about the booth. They searched the church thoroughly. Nothing. No signs of struggle. No hidden rooms. Father Thomas acted offended that I would even suggest something sinister, but I started watching him. He'd been the priest for almost 25 years. People trusted him. He baptized their children, buried their parents. But as days passed, I noticed something strange. 3 other girls had gone missing over the last decade. All around the same age as Emily, all volunteers at the church. None ever found, and every disappearance had one thing in common. They were last seen helping Father Thomas close up. A week after Emily vanished, I broke into the church basement. There was a small locked door behind the altar that led downstairs. The police had checked it, but something told me they hadn't looked closely enough. The basement was old. Stone walls, low ceilings, shelves filled with dusty decorations and broken furniture. But in the far corner, behind a row of stacked boxes, I found a second door. It wasn't part of the original architecture. The wood looked newer, and it was locked with a heavy padlock. I didn't think. I grabbed a rusted metal bar nearby and smashed it until the lock snapped. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Rot. Not strong, but faint. Sour. Inside was a narrow passageway that led deeper beneath the church. My flashlight shook as I walked. The walls changed from stone to rough dirt, like a tunnel had been dug by hand. At the end of the tunnel was a small underground chamber, and inside there were chairs, 4 of them, bolted to the ground, straps attached to the armrests. My stomach turned. On the far wall was a wooden cross, and beneath it, a pile of personal items, hair clips, bracelets, scraps of fabric, things that didn't belong to the church. And sitting on top of the pile was Emily's necklace. I stumbled back. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured. I turned. Father Thomas stood at the entrance of the chamber. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't panicked. It was calm. Disappointed. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said quietly. My body felt frozen. "Where is she?" I demanded. He sighed. They come to me with their sins, their darkness, and sometimes the darkness doesn't leave. You're insane. He shook his head. You think this church is holy. This ground is old, much older than faith. He stepped closer. There are things beneath us, things that whisper. The air in the chamber suddenly felt colder. From the darkness behind him, I heard it. Breathing, multiple breaths. Not one, not two. Many. Father Thomas smiled faintly. They confessed, he said softly, and the church kept them. The dirt walls behind him shifted. I'm not exaggerating. They moved, like something inside them was pressing outward. The ground trembled. Hands, pale, thin hands, pushed through the dirt, dozens of them, reaching, grasping. I backed into the chamber wall. One of the chairs rattled violently, and from somewhere in the tunnel, I heard Emily scream. It echoed, distorted, like it was coming from underground. I tried to run past him, but the dirt beneath my feet gave way. The ground collapsed. I fell into darkness. I woke up in a confined space. Cold, tight, wood pressed against my face. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't sit up. It took a few seconds to realize I was inside one of the chairs, strapped down. The underground chamber surrounded me. The tunnel entrance was gone. Just dirt walls, and Father Thomas was kneeling in front of the cross, praying. The pale hands still protruded from the walls, twitching slightly. You'll understand soon, he whispered without turning around. They all do. Where is she? I sobbed. He finally looked at me. She confessed something she shouldn't have. My blood ran cold. What? The chamber lights, small hanging bulbs I hadn't noticed before, began to flicker. The hands in the walls started clawing harder. The dirt cracked, and from the cracks, faces emerged, distorted, half-formed, mouths open in silent screams. I saw one that looked like Emily, or what used to be her. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and smeared with earth. She looked at me, and her mouth moved. Don't. The straps tightened around my wrists. Not mechanically. They tightened on their own. The walls began to pulse, like a living organism. Father Thomas stood. It needs faith, he said calmly. Or fear. The hands lunged forward. The last thing I remember was something cold wrapping around my ankle, pulling, hard. They never found me. The police searched the church again after I disappeared. Father Thomas claimed I was grieving and unstable. He still preaches every Sunday. The church still stands on that hill outside York. And sometimes, late at night, people walking past say they hear something strange coming from inside. Not hymns, not prayers. This is my second story. Blackwood Chapel sits alone at the edge of a narrow country road outside Edinburgh. You don't pass it by accident. You have to be going somewhere specific, or nowhere at all. The stone walls are cracked, the bell tower slightly tilted, and the surrounding trees lean inward, as if trying to swallow it. No services have been held there for nearly 30 years. Officially, it closed due to structural concerns. Unofficially, people in town just say the singing never stopped. I went there because of a dare. I was 19, stupid enough to want proof that nothing scared me. It was just past midnight when I parked near the rusted iron gate. The wind was sharp, cutting through my jacket. The chapel looked darker than the sky behind it. The front doors were chained, but a smaller side entrance was slightly open. That should have been my sign to leave. Instead, I pulled out my phone flashlight and stepped inside. The air inside was stale and thick with dust. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I walked down the aisle. The pews were still arranged neatly, untouched. The altar cloth had rotted away, leaving only a bare wooden table beneath a faded crucifix. That's when I heard it. Soft humming, not coming from the main hall, from above me. There was a narrow wooden staircase near the back wall leading upward. I almost laughed. Old buildings make noises. Wind through beams, animals nesting. That's all it was. But the humming continued. Low, harmonized. Like multiple voices holding the same note. I started climbing. The attic was wide and unexpectedly clean. Dust covered everything, except the center of the room. 20 wooden chairs were arranged in perfect rows, facing a small podium. The seats were spotless, like someone had been sitting there recently. The humming stopped the second my flashlight beam crossed the chairs. I took one step forward. The wooden floor creaked, and slowly, one chair shifted. Just slightly, then another, then all of them, turning toward me. There was no one sitting in them, but they moved like there was weight in them. The podium at the front creaked next. Not loudly, just enough to show pressure, as if someone invisible had stepped behind it. The humming started again, but this time, it surrounded me. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It wasn't echoing. It was forming words, Latin, clear, precise, and angry. My hand shook so badly, I dropped my phone. It hit the floor, but didn't shut off. The flashlight beam rolled sideways, casting long, warped shadows across the chairs. The humming grew louder, closer. I grabbed my phone and ran toward the staircase, but the door at the top was closed. I hadn't closed it. I know I hadn't. Behind me, every chair scraped across the floor at once. Don't remember how I got out. I woke up outside the chapel just before sunrise, lying near the gate. My phone was still in my hand. When I checked it later, there was a recording saved automatically, 3 minutes long. The first minute was silence. Then the humming began. Layered voices, at least 20 of them, and underneath it, a deeper voice leading them. When the choir stopped, that deeper voice whispered one sentence clearly in English. You left before the final verse. I went back the next day with 2 friends. The attic was empty. No chairs, no podium, just dust, thick and untouched. Blackwood Chapel still stands. And sometimes at night, drivers say they hear singing drifting across the trees. Perfect harmony, waiting for someone to finish the song. This is my 3rd story. St. Declan's Church stands alone on the cliffs of Northern Ireland, facing an ocean that never rests. Waves crash violently below, spraying salt against its white stone walls. The church is small, old, older than most records can confirm. Locals say it was built on sacred ground, long before Christianity reached the coast. I visited during a research trip. I was studying religious architecture. St. Declan's wasn't on my official list, but something about it drew me in. Inside, the church was quiet. No electricity, only candles placed carefully along the walls. In the center of the floor was a stone baptismal font carved directly into the foundation. It was filled with water, fresh water. Despite the ocean being only yards away, the caretaker told me something strange before he left for the evening. "Don't stay after dark," he said. "Why?" I asked. He hesitated. "The water changes." I laughed it off, but I stayed. By midnight, the wind outside had grown violent. The church walls groaned softly. Candle flames flickered aggressively, though no windows were open. And then I noticed it. The water in the font was glowing faint blue, not reflecting light, emitting it. I stepped closer. The glow intensified, and then a wet footprint appeared on the stone floor beside the font. Small, child-sized. Then another, leading down the aisle toward the altar. At the end of the aisle stood a boy, maybe 8 years old. Pale, clothes soaked, water dripping onto the floor without sound. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the ocean through the church doors. The walls began to crack, thin lines spreading across the stone like veins. Sea water seeped through. The boy slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were completely black, not empty, filled, like deep water. The water in the baptismal font began rising, overflowing, spilling across the floor. But it didn't stop. It kept rising higher than the edge should allow. The boy opened his mouth, and water poured out endlessly. The cracks in the walls widened. The sound of crashing waves grew impossibly loud, even though the doors were closed. Ran. I don't remember reaching the door. I don't remember climbing the cliff path. I woke up in my hotel room the next morning. My clothes were dry. My shoes were clean. But inside my pocket, there was sand. Wet sand. I returned to St. Declan's that afternoon. The caretaker looked uneasy when he saw me. "You stayed," he said quietly. The church was normal again. No cracks, no water. The baptismal font was empty, completely dry. I asked him about the boy. He stared at the ocean for a long time before answering. "Every generation," he said. "One child drowns near these cliffs." He looked back at the font. "They bring the body here before burial." I felt my throat tighten. "What happens after dark?" He didn't answer directly. He just said, "The ocean gives them back for one last baptism." Declan still stands on those cliffs, and if you ever see blue light glowing through its windows after midnight, don't go inside, because some things don't stay buried in the sea. They come back to be welcomed home.